Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're joining us today. And today I'm doing an interview with Matt Cox, which I'm so excited about this. We had a couple of people cancel, and I was like, Matt, we need to come up with somebody quickly, or else I think I should do an interview with you. And I didn't know if you would go for it or not, but you did.
It took me a minute to talk myself through it, but
now I started thinking about it, and you're one of the most creative people that I think I know, in terms of you're so multi-talented and you're super creative. And I think you got a fascinating history and story. And of course I know some of it, not all of it, but certainly know some of it. So I just thought, people would get a kick out of us having a conversation. And I think if those who are tuning in who don't know Matt Cox, Matt and I have known each other for over a decade. He was our full-time videographer at Vineyard Church while I was there. And then a little over a year ago, he started his own company called Harbor Media Productions. And it was at that point that I asked him if he would start helping me out with this Spirituality Adventures project, which he has been here basically almost from the beginning. Whitney Grable was with me a few weeks before Matt jumped in, but I'm so grateful for being able to work with you so many years. And I've always loved working with you. So this is kind of fun to talk about it. So there's going to be a lot of people who don't really know your background story. So why don't you share where you grew up and kind of your family of origin story,
Sure. So I grew up, I was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. My dad was in the Air Force. So I was actually born at Tinker Air Force Base. And then I was real young, I think 3 or 4 when we moved to Willow Springs, where my parents were both from. And that's right in the middle of Missouri, as far south as you can go. And there's one other town dividing Willow and Arkansas.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up down there. And then when I was 12 or 13, we moved to Kansas City for my dad went to seminary at Midwestern. And I went to Northgate and Northtown for school. There was a little bit of homeschool in between some of that stuff too. That's where I grew up.
What was your dad doing down in Willow, Missouri? What was it called?
Willow Springs,
Missouri. What was he doing down there?
So he works for a physical therapy specialist clinic, and he does a lot of different things. He's been working there for a long time, and then once he finished seminary, he actually went back down there and pastored a church for quite a while too. So,
okay. So when he finished seminary, how old were you?
16.
Did you go back down there with him at that point? Here. You stayed here.
Yeah,
okay, we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Here. But and then how many siblings do you have?
I have one younger sister.
Okay.
So
how much younger?
4 years. Okay. 3 or 4 years. Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. So man, you're a Southern Missouri kid from Wait,
and it's real strange too, because anytime I always mention West Plains is where I'm.
Yeah, like that's what I remember you saying.
Some people know West Plains, and so that's like kind of the neighboring town. We spend a lot of time there and everything, and so anytime I'm trying to like connect dots for people, I always mention West Plains because there's a college campus there, and like some people, you have a better chance of knowing West Plains than you do Willow. Willow's very tiny, but so
I've been to West Plains, but never been to Willow Springs. So.
Yep.
Yeah. So, so you have such a creative history. You're basically your whole life has been in creative adventures.
Yeah.
And so when did that start for you? Like how young were you, and when were you first drawn to music, artistic things? What was
I mean, I've been into music as long as I can remember. I started playing music when I think I got my first instrument when I got my first guitar when I would have been like 10 or 11. But before that, music's always kind of been a big thing in our house because my dad always had music playing. And so I grew up listening to like Johnny Cash, Fleetwood Mac, and Led Zeppelin, and like that kind of stuff was always on. And then there was a time where like the only thing that was allowed in our house was like late 80s, early 90s, like praise and worship music.
So like all the rock and roll got all the secular rock and roll got banned.
Often, yeah. It was just like we listened, like Newsboys was really big.
Oh yeah,
for a while.
That's not bad.
So Newsboys wasn't bad, but then we had like these other CDs and tapes that like Newsboys was like my escape because they had like electric guitar.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so music was always a big thing. And I started playing music when I was like 10 or 11, trying to learn the guitar and stuff. And I switched over from guitar to bass, and then from bass to drums. And drums is where it like really clicked for me. I loved playing drums. But so music started pretty young.
And was anybody in your family, any of your parents musical or anything like that?
No.
It just clicked for you, huh?
Yeah, no, it was just one of those things.
Were you in school band or anything like that?
Yes and no. Like it was one of those things, like I never, this sounds bad, but like when I was younger, like it was really hard to find things that like kept me intrigued. Like I'd try something out for a while and be like, I'm gonna try something. Like I was always bouncing around to different things. So I was in band for a while and then would go to something else. And I don't know. It was all over the place. Yeah. So I don't know. Music was the first thing that like felt right to me though. I know that, like, and then there was always like this want to learn how to draw. My dad does like comic book art and stuff like that, and he's an amazing like pen and ink artist, and I always wanted to be able to do that. And so I'd always like have these sketchbooks of like trying to draw cars or learn how to draw faces properly, and I could never get it. And so I was just like, I can't do this. And then when I got a little bit older, I found out that like I could do that on a computer and make it look pretty okay. Nice. So I taught myself how to do everything digitally, which now it's kind of fun because my dad will like draw something and then scan it or draw it on his iPad and then send it to me, and I'll like color it or whatever, and we like send stuff back and forth to each other. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so there was that led into like me getting into like graphic design and stuff, and so there's always been some sort of trying to find something artistic that I could pour myself into, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. But.
Well, it's interesting because I grew up on some of that music that your dad was playing. And then when I went off to college, I took my whole vinyl record collection with me, which was mostly, 70s prog rock stuff. Yeah. But then, and then I would have had a few of the early Christian artists of the late 70s and early 80s. But I remember there was all of a sudden all the youth groups around America, like youth, there was this big push to get teenagers to stop listening to rock and roll because it was corrupting their brains. And I remember there was even like this one video that a lot of youth groups, especially conservative evangelical youth groups in America in the early 80s, I think it was, there's this thing called Hell's Bells, and it was like they'd go into like backmasking, and the dude would actually play albums backwards, and you couldn't hardly make sense of it, but he would say, they're saying like something like demonic or something like that. And so he would say, did you hear that? And you're like, yeah, kind of, and then
if you play something enough times, your brain will start trying to connect it.
Yeah,
and make
exactly.
You feel like
and so all of a sudden, so there's this big push. So I remember I got rid of my whole, because well, God, I don't want to be demonized by listening to me, so I'm like, I got rid of my whole great record collection, and I was like, crap, I wish I had it back. Later on, I was like, I wish I had it back.
Yeah,
anyway,
for real.
But
Kristen just got me, so a big sentimental record for me. My dad used to play Joshua Tree to get me to go to sleep, and he'd play it on vinyl and everything. And my wife actually not too long ago got me an original, like, first pressing of Joshua Tree. And so that's been a lot. Like, I listen to that. And my second to youngest, Hatcher, anytime he's in my office or in our old house, it was our living room, he'd run up to the record player and point at it. And so we listen to Joshua Tree and dance around the office a lot now.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Music's a huge thing.
Yeah. After I went through that phase in the 80s of not listening to hardly any secular music, U2 was the band that got me back into it. And I listened to Sunday Bloody Sunday album, and just like, I like these guys. And then that's when I started kind of, jumping back in. Yeah. And, really, the only thing I really missed was the hair bands of the 80s. That's about the time when I exited, and then I came back in with like early U2 and early, Echo and the Bunnymen. So you just REM. And so I don't feel super bad about skipping. I was going to say,
that might have worked out for the better. I mean, I don't know.
Some of my younger friends, though, that's their era. It's like, they love the hair band. So anyway. Well, so how old were you when your dad came to seminary?
So I would have been like 12 or 13 when we moved that's when we moved up here. Okay. We moved up here and he started seminary right away.
And so this is a Southern Baptist seminary that your dad is going to. So I'm assuming you guys were attending a Southern Baptist church. Yep. And you're 12 or 13 and you're already into music, right? So how was that experience? Kansas City, 12, 13, living on seminary Southern Baptist housing campus. How was that for Matt Cox?
It was crazy. I had all this like pretty stern like upbringing. I don't know if stern's the right word, but like my parents were very cautious about what we brought into the house, what movies we watched and what TV shows were allowed and what music we listened to and stuff. And then I come to Kansas City and I go to my first public school in Kansas City and I get introduced to like, I had snuck and listened to like Eminem and Dr. Dre and like that kind of stuff when we lived in Willow.
Southern Missouri, small town.
It was hard
white
to get
kid listening to rap music.
It was hard to get a hold of that stuff down there. And so we moved to Kansas City and like it's more accessible and like all these different things, just like everything was just available. Like my world just kind of exploded and it was real rough for a while, honestly. Like at the time I thought it was awesome because I just like there's all this new music. There's just
so did you have to like sneak? Were you trying to sneak it? Like you were trying to hide the music you were listening to.
It was not good for my. I don't know how I'm trying to say it. Like it was bad because I would have to pretend that like or hide it and pretend that I knew nothing about it and stuff like that because I didn't want to get in trouble. But
what year was this? I'm trying to think because like.
I think we moved to Kansas City in 2003, 2002.
Okay. I was just trying to think the technology, what you were like, you didn't have a mobile phone yet, right? So you're probably listening.
I got a phone shortly after we moved to Kansas City, but it was like one of those Nokia like brick phones. Like I could play Snake on it. Like that's about all I could do.
So you were listening to music probably. Were you downloading on a hard drive or something? Or what were you,
so that was back in the
were
days.
You pirating
like,
music?
Yeah. So like you used to be able to have like LimeWire and stuff like that. And like I ruined several of our family's computers downloading viruses on accident. I didn't know what I was doing. My dad would constantly be like, if I find LimeWire on the computer again, you're not allowed to use it. And like, yeah, it was bad. But
oh wow.
Yeah, I got like more exposure to like hip hop and stuff like that, and which is now like a huge influence for like I love hip hop. And I'm a fan of like the older I don't know, like A Tribe Called Quest and like so like 90s transitioning into 2000s era is kind of my favorite. But yeah, it was crazy. Like that whole transition of moving from a very small town to coming to Kansas City and having a pretty strict environment, to my parents both working full time and my dad being in school. So I had a lot of free time too, with not very much supervision. And so it was a weird.
Yeah.
It was
well,
crazy.
And it's kind of interesting because for people who may have been following our interviews for a while, like I interviewed Darrison.
Yeah.
And I think, and King Kie, for those of you who might go back, Darrison Palea, and I think you guys met sometime.
Yeah.
In this little phase, right?
Yeah, I went to school with his younger brother Diamond.
Okay.
And so I met him my first year in school in Kansas City, and yeah.
So hip hop guy and rap hip hop artist here in Kansas City, and then we interviewed Smart Alec, which was Alex Sartiano, right? And I think you guys met in high school, maybe, right? Or later? Was that later?
So it was a lot later, but like in high school. I found out that we all like were around the same group of friends. I'm sure I probably ran into him. I just didn't know him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's weird. And then like when I got a little bit older, realizing that there was like, oh, there's people that actually do this here in Kansas City. So then that gets into the whole like me discovering local music and stuff, which blew my mind. Like that was.
And this is what, because many of the interviews I've done have been through your connections.
Yeah.
You know, and so you've got this huge connection to the local indie music scene here in Kansas City, which has just been fascinating to me to meet some of these people and interview them. And that's been really fun. And, so talk about that. Like, when did you get into your first band? How did you start? How did you start discovering all these musicians?
Yeah.
It had to have been when you were young, like you're a teenager.
8th grade. It was 8th grade year.
So in 8th grade, you started getting into indie music in Kansas City.
Yeah.
You were also, did you start playing in a band at that point?
Yeah. So the church we were going to at the time needed somebody to play drums for like the youth group / contemporary worship team. So I started filling in for that, and then met a bunch of kids my age and a little bit older that were from here, and they introduced me into like other local bands. And during that time it was like Game Time, and there was a lot of like pop punk bands that were kind of like my first introduction into local music. And I just obsessed over it. I was just like, man, people actually here in town do this, and they play shows and all this stuff. And so I wanted to meet all these people and go to shows and everything. And so I just started attending a lot of local shows and meeting people and introducing myself. And then
this is like when you're still junior high school.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So
like, how were you getting there? Who was were you friends?
I made older friends,
yeah.
and I just rode
just
around.
Picking you up.
Yeah. I mean, really, yeah. I was just getting rides everywhere. The summer after my 8th grade year was like, that's pretty much all we did. I remember I saw Norma Jean, which has been like one of my favorite bands for a long time. I saw them that summer at this place called the Spitfire that's no longer around anymore. It used to be in the West Bottoms. And then that night, that show, I was like, I just want to be a drummer for the rest of my life. I just want to play drums. And so I played in a couple local bands.
What are the names?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
They're ridiculous. And
jumped in and jumped out.
Yeah, there was a lot of like drummers in Kansas City play for a lot of different bands. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of guitar players. There's very few bassists and drummers, from my experience anyway. But I would fill in for people and just play here and there. My longest stint in a band was a band that a friend and I started, and that was much later in life, like in my late 20s.
Okay.
And so,
all right, we'll get to that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, cool. And then how about, like, did you start doing, when did the video stuff start? When did you start doing like camera film work?
So,
film,
I got
film,
into
digital. I know digital was, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so my first experience with a camera actually was my mom's old film camera. She had a 35 millimeter and it was a Canon. And I asked her if I could get it out and put some film in it and go take some pictures. And I went and got them developed and everything later on. And I was like, man, this turned out pretty cool. This was a lot of fun. And then, I realized that I could do like double exposure stuff. And so I would take pictures of like a corner of a wall or like something like really stark, like just like the trees in the sky or something like that, and then wind the film back up, put it back in the camera, and then shoot like a portrait over top of it.
Oh, interesting.
And so I was doing like double exposure stuff, and I eventually learned how to like develop my own film and stuff. But that was my first, that was the first time I ever used a camera. Would have been like very beginning of my freshman year. Mm-hmm. And I shortly after that got a digital camera that could shoot photo and video. So actually a year before that, my mom and dad had got me a video camera that shot on high 8 tape. And so that would have been actually my first experience with video. Super 8. Yeah. And I basically just burned through tapes filming me and my friends like doing skateboard tricks and stuff like that. And so like my first video I ever edited was like a skate video of me and some of my friends. Where
were you skating at? Were there skate parks?
Yeah. So Pleasant Valley.
I remember that one. Yeah. And then
we would skate places around like the seminary too. There was a lot of staircases over there that we would try and jump, and Northtown had a lot of cool spots too. Just kind of wherever.
Yeah. You weren't doing BMX, were you?
I did. No, not then. Okay. So I did BMX. I was really into biking. I rode my bike everywhere when we lived in Willow. And that was it. Kind of like Stranger Things episodes, like the kids always on their bikes. Like I rode my bike everywhere.
Yeah, that's fun.
But yeah, so I did BMX. My neighbor, when we lived in Willow, had this huge like box ramp that he built, and I would just sit out in our driveway and just watch these guys. Like they were doing all these tricks and like jumping over the roof of this dude's house, and I was just like, wow. Like, but yeah.
So gosh, you're in the rap, skater punk.
Anything I could find, honestly. I just wanted
BMX. You're playing in bands. You're having older friends pick you up, take you to concerts, and your dad's studying in seminary this whole time, living on seminary campus. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
All right, so that's kind of your high school career, basically, right? And so then let's dial forward a little bit. Some things happened that kind of changed your world pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
And you want to talk?
Sure.
And you might want to talk a little bit about your spiritual journey in this too, and how that kind of unfolded for you.
Yeah, that's kind of where everything first started kind of clicking for me, I guess. I don't know. It was a lot of stuff happened in a very short period of time. So I met Kristen, my now wife. I was 15, and she came in. So like I was still playing drums for this for the worship team at this church that we were going to, and Kristen came in to audition for like backup vocalist for a singing position on the worship team. And she walked in, and I just remember thinking, oh, she's hot. Mm-hmm. And I just was like kind of just staring and everything, and then she'd look at me and be like pretending I was doing something. And so she came up to me after the tryouts or whatever, and she's like, well, I got in and they're gonna let me sing. And I was like, cool, good job. And I didn't know what to say, and she's like, you should give me your number so that I can call you and you can tell me when practices are. And like she was asking for my number, and I'm like, okay. And I almost stupidly was like, I thought Ryan already told you what time practices were, but I was like, all right, yeah. So I gave her my number, and we started talking and hanging out and everything, started dating. And probably 9 months later, we find out that she's pregnant. And the church that we were going to.
So you're 16.
I'm 16.
Yeah. And she's
17.
17.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the church we were going to, we had talked to some people and told them what was going on and everything. And we like talked to them before we talked to anybody else. And it was just a real scary time. I mean, we were young, and I barely had my license. And I was just like,
driver's license.
Yeah, my driver's license.
Right.
And I don't know. It was just it was very scary. But I knew that like I wanted to be a dad, and I was going to do what I needed to do. And so we go and talk to some people at this church.
Did you did you talk to your folks first and then talk to the church people?
So the conversation with my parents was real crazy how that happened. Kristen was calling, and I was freaking out and not sure how to tell my parents. And so Kristen actually ended up telling my mom on the phone when she had called the house. And so then I had to talk to him about it, because she's like, we need to have this talk. And I was just like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm not ready to have this talk yet. And she's like, but it needs to happen. And so we finally sit down and talk with them. And then, long story short, the church that we're going to not only asked us to step down from the worship team, but asked us not to attend. And that messed with me really bad. Put me into this funk of like, I don't want anything to do with church ever again. Mm-hmm. Like I could never step foot in a church for the rest of my life and be totally fine. It was rough. That's where a lot of my friends, that's where I was all the time. Like, and I lost that group of friends when I stopped going there too, because they were like ashamed or afraid or felt weird hanging out with me after that and stuff. And so that like completely rerouted where I thought I was headed or who I thought I had around me. And so that was just a real rough time. So I got a second job. I was already working at Subway. I was a sandwich artist. And I got a second job working at Target. And Henry was born in November of 2005.
Okay.
So yeah, he's actually next week he'll be turning 16.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right.
So he'll be turning the age that I was when I had him.
Wow, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right, Henry, if you're listening, we love you. All right, man. I'm glad you're Glad you're here. All right.
And I don't know. I remember feeling like it as crazy as everything was around me, everything felt like it was falling apart, but I still felt very firm on like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a dad. I'm going to do the best that I can. And so I just kept working, and my dad, Henry, would have been, I'm trying to think, maybe a year old. I don't know. I have a really hard time like remembering exact. There's a lot of like from the age of 16 to about 20. There's a lot of it that I've suppressed, honestly, that I try not to remember. It was a real crazy couple like few years. It was just really tough.
Yeah. So did you move out? Did you and Kristen did you move out of your? Like, did you graduate from high school? Did you stay at your house?
So I finished high school through like homeschooling route and everything like that, just because of work. So I didn't have time. It wouldn't allow for me to like actually be in school because I needed to work. So I went that route, and then Kristen was still living at her grandparents' house, and I was living with my parents. And then for a short time, Kristen moved in and stayed with us, and that was really rough. It was just a weird thing. We were super young. I had a younger sister, and so it was just this weird, like, Kristen had her own room and everything, but we didn't know what to do. And so my dad graduates or finishes seminary and everything, and gets a church, finds a position as a pastor for a church in West Plains. And so they moved down there and do that. And I stayed here and moved in with Kristen's family.
Was Henry already born?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Henry would have been about a year old when all that happened. So I moved in with Kristen's family. We were there for a short amount of time, and again, that was super rough too. It was a weird thing, and it's just like there was no easy way around our situation. Like, it was just like we were really young, and there was a baby, and it was just like, I don't know, not like your normal circumstances, obviously. Right. And so we were just trying to make it work the best that we could. And so we actually ended up finding an apartment complex. We talked to this lady and explained our situation to her and everything, and she's like, I want to rent an apartment to you guys. And we were like 16 and 17. I don't think she was supposed to do that, but we made it work. And like, we got some like signatures and everything to help us out and everything. And so we moved in, and we're paying rent, and got our own place very young. And it was rough. Like, we didn't know like how much are utilities going to be? What's that? Like, we didn't know how life worked, and we figured it out. We had to figure it out really fast.
Wow. Crazy.
A crazy situation.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Did Kristen get a job? Was she?
Yeah. So Kristen actually for a long time, she worked as a vet tech, and so she did that for quite a while, actually.
Okay.
So.
All right. So you're working two jobs, and somehow you
eventually switched over to just one.
Okay.
But yeah, was doing two for a while.
All this time you kind of kept a foot in the music video world, right?
I stayed connected with a lot of those people. It was just one of those things, like I didn't feel right like stepping away from it. Like I felt like this kind of I don't know how to explain it, just like a little bit of like a spark anytime I would do anything creative, and I just kept feeling called, like I think that's what I'm supposed to do. And so like all throughout my late teens and early 20s, like I would work whatever job, but I'd always be doing photo or video stuff on the side or doing graphic design, and then eventually like worked my way up through different graphic design jobs and production jobs. And I did an internship program for a production company out in Kansas. So that whole story, how that happened, is I was debating with Chris, and I'm like, I really think it'd be cool to like go to film school. And I talked to this guy, and he's like, don't do it. I just dropped out of film school. I spent a ton of money going to film school, and I was there for a year and a half, and they taught me how to like critique and watch movies. And he's like, get an internship with somebody. And so I found this production company out in Kansas, and I did an internship with them. And like the first job I worked with them, I was shooting a TV commercial for a roofing company. And they were like throwing all these terms at me. It's like, grab the boom and get the gaff and all this. And I was just like, I've always just shot stuff by myself. I have no clue what you're talking about. And so they were super patient with me and like walked me through the terminology and what was what and everything like that. And it was real crazy. But I did that, and then stayed in like the graphic design world for work for quite a while.
Yeah. And so you kind of even into your 20s. When did you have your second kid? How old were you then?
So Heidi would have been, I was 18.
Okay.
18 when we had Heidi.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just for all you know, Matt just had his seventh kid. Just a few months ago.
Yeah. So Heartland's 11 weeks old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Matt's my hero, man. I tell you, I really love his family. So at any rate, but no. So you're playing in some bands.
Yeah.
Like you're still doing drums. You even were in a band that you started.
Yeah.
And then you also ended up starting some type of a video company pretty young too, right?
Mm-hmm. So we opened up a recording studio / audio. So like recording, photo, video, kind of all in one. Basically, some friends and I came across this space in the West Bottoms, and we're like, we would be crazy not to make this work. Like one of my friends really wanted to open a recording studio. I really wanted to have a photo video studio. And so we rented this space out and then turned the front half of it into like a communal workspace, which at the time there wasn't like WeWorks or iWorks or any of that stuff. Like there wasn't hardly any of those like communal like office or cubicle renting spaces set up in Kansas City. And so like we kind of pitched the idea to some people, and like 96.5 The Buzz picked it up and like, this is a cool idea and everything. Like, so we started talking about it, and we're like,
this is probably what, 2014. 14. Okay.
Yeah, 2014 is when we started the studio. And so the front half was turned, like we had like Made Urban Apparel, like some of those guys like were some of the first people that were working out of the front of our building. And we had photographers and like graphic designers and a whole bunch of people just working in this space. And it was really cool to have that community. Like you'd be working on a project and then you could just like walk out and like ask 10 people who you valued their opinion and knew they made really cool stuff to be like, hey, come look at this and tell me what you think about it.
Yeah.
So I loved that environment. It was really cool. But yeah, we had the studio in the West Bottoms for a while. So and then at this point, where were you at spiritually? Had you completely stayed away from the church and all that kind of stuff? You were like still like just going, I can't do that. I was in between, like I don't even know what I would say. Like I felt like if someone asked me if I believed in God, I would say yeah, but like that was it. It was just I think so. And it wouldn't even have been a very sure yes. Like I just, it wasn't anything I paid attention to. I didn't have any interest in it. I had kind of given up on all that stuff. And so, during that whole getting the studio situated and everything, Kristen and I were going through a really tough time, and we had actually split up. And
and you had how many kids at this point?
Four.
Yeah. 4 young kids.
Yeah.
You're going through a tough time, so you guys separate.
Yeah. And so I'm like sleeping on the floor at this studio in the West Bottoms in the middle of winter, and just like freezing to death every night and everything. So I was just miserable. I was not in a good spot. a friend of mine who was actually renting space out in the front of the warehouse, John Mann, was like, the church I go to is needing help with video stuff. And I was just like, cool. like,
yeah, all right.
Whatever.
Next topic.
Yeah. And he's like, you should talk to him. I think you'd like him. It's pretty cool. And I was just like, whatever, man. Like, I don't care. And so I'd kind of forgotten about it. And then this particular night, I had some friends over to the studio. It was late in the evening. I smoked and drank a lot and just passed out in a beanbag chair. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up, and John Mann comes in and like kicks me, and he's like, hey, I need you to meet this guy. And I was just like, I'm trying, I don't want to like cuss and everything, but I was just like, F this dude, like I'm blah, blah, and just, I was cussing and just agitated and everything. And I was hungover, and I get up and I'm walking in the next room, and he's like, hey man, I'm Steve Jones. And he's like, I work for Vineyard Church. And I was like, shit. And then I covered my mouth. I was like, I'm sorry, man. I was like, I just been having a really rough couple of days. He's like, dude, don't worry about it. And so we talked about doing video stuff. And some of the stuff that he was wanting videos done of was like people telling their story of like similar situations to what I was in, but then like working on coming out of that. And I was just like, I'd actually really like to do something like that. That'd be cool. And so yeah, that led to one thing led to another, and I ended up at Vineyard shooting videos. And for the first couple of video shoots I did there, I was just like, this is a video thing. Like, I'm going to do these videos. I'm going to do my best at them, give them to them, and then be done with it at the end of the day, kind of a thing. And I remember one Sunday morning, it was super weird. I just felt, I was like, I think I'm actually going to go like check out a church. Like, I hadn't been to church yet. I still hadn't like committed to like, I'm going to go back and check out a church. And mind you, I had never stepped foot in a church unless it was to listen to my dad preach, like every once, like I think maybe 5 times. Like, I hadn't been to church in a long time.
Right.
Like, I mean,
almost a decade, probably, right?
Yeah. And so I was like, I guess I'm going to check it out. And so like I go into Vineyard and I sit through a service. I'm like, this was pretty good. Like, it felt comfortable. Nobody made me feel weird. I don't know. It just like, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And so like a couple more weeks go by, and then I called Kristen one Sunday and I'm like, you should come to church with me. I don't know why, but I did. And it was very rocky still between the two of us. And so we go to a church service together, and I just so happened to pick a Sunday to invite her to church, to where it was a Sunday that you were talking about forgiveness. And we were both sitting there, and it was just like in the middle of the service, like we both just like felt something, I don't know, and like Kristen reached over and put her hand on mine, and it was super freaking emotional. And but that was like the first time in a long time that we like spent the rest of the day together, and we were talking with each other about like what forgiveness meant and moving past some things and working on the, like, it was a big pivoting moment for us.
Wow.
And
very
so,
cool.
Yeah, that was kind of how I got back into church.
Yeah. Yeah, that gives me chills a little bit.
To me, that was definitely like a God thing. And so like as far as my spirituality goes, like that whole like finding Vineyard and the people at Vineyard when I did was definitely a huge thing, because like I ended up to several people before I was offered a job at Vineyard. I had a couple of conversations with people of like, I don't know that you would want to offer me a job. I'm having a rough time right now. Things are not great and everything, like, and nobody freaked out at me, you know, like nobody judged me, and nobody made me feel more shame than I already had on my shoulders. And it was like, we'll work with it. We'll work through it with you, kind of a thing, instead of like, you keep your stuff over there, which is what I had experienced. And like just months before all of this had happened, I had another huge church in Kansas City call me and like, we want you to come do video production for us. I sit down in the first interview and I say, my wife and I are possibly in the beginning of a divorce right now. Like, I just need to let you know that, because I don't want it coming up later or anything like that. I don't want that to affect anything. I just wanted to get it out on the table. They stopped the interview right then and there, and we're like, we don't need that going on right now. Sorry that you're dealing with that. We're just going to move on to the next person. And they made me leave.
Oh, wow.
And so that was like that was like my first interaction with a church in a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
So it just kind of, it backed up what I had already been feeling. And I was just like, see, but yeah. And I just found, I found people that accepted who I was and where I was at. Yeah. And that was huge. Yeah. That was what I needed. And
it's what we all need.
I was going to find it at a church.
Yeah.
But I did. And it was, man. Yeah. So anyway,
no, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. It's so crazy that the tables got turned around on us, and here I am. You're helping me out now, right? No, showing me grace.
No, it's I don't know. I think that's just, I don't know. I think that's just the way it should be with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. We all need grace and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we started working together. You were on my creative team. We met weekly, and I loved working with you. And so, I was so, when I was getting Spirituality Adventure started, I was careful about trying to recruit people from the Vineyard. Right. And so, but when you started Harbor Media Productions, we met and talked, and I've been so thankful that we've been able to work together this last year. So it's been,
me too.
It's been really good. And so I'm curious, like, and thinking back on all of, you've gone through a lot of stuff, and now you're a dad of 7 kids, and you've got this new company going that seems like it's going really well. Yeah, and so God's grace has been, a big part of your life and your experience now. And we've talked a lot about some of this stuff, and we've talked even about mental health. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to ask you a little bit about kind of the spiritual journey of mental health, and how that's been a part of your journey as well as mine. We've talked a lot about this stuff, but do you have any reflections on kind of that side of the equation that you're comfortable talking about? I'm not sure.
I mean, there's a lot, or anything specific, or like. Well,
I'm just thinking about, man, you've gone through some dark times, mm-hmm. and it's. You've found, you're here, you're alive, you're doing well, you're thriving right now as a dad and as a owner of a company, but you've gone through some really dark moments, and you've had to really look at some mental health issues. I know, and I don't know what you're comfortable talking about.
but any of it, honestly, I'm perfectly fine talking about any of it, because I think that's the first step of dealing with all of it too, is I was afraid to talk about it. I wouldn't even talk with my wife about some of the stuff that I was going through. And I think that was the first thing that I had to overcome, was talking about it, and not feeling like that talking about it made me weak or made me I don't know, like, it just, I had this kind of assumption that, like, if I admitted that I was dealing with some of this stuff, that I was like, mm-hmm. fucked up. Yeah. And people would see me as that and just kind of write me off, kind of a thing.
Well, I'm even thinking, and we don't have to go here, but I wrote a blog a month or so, 2 months ago, maybe, on suicide. Yeah. And we had a person that we knew, mm-hmm. that had committed suicide. It kind of sparked that whole thing, because in 2019, I was in such a dark place. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't actually going to go kill myself, but I tell people I was a notch above that. Like, I didn't really want to get up every morning, and mm-hmm. it was so dark, and I was just like, and I think you've had some moments like that got pretty dark.
Late. So I mean, it's not been that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. So like my personality, I'm very like people pleaser kind of thing. Like I have to, like I'm constantly feeling like I have to like earn everyone's approval, I guess. And so I had gotten into this really rough cycle of like just working nonstop, trying to make sure that everybody knew that like I appreciated them and I wanted to be around, and like I needed to earn some sort of badge or whatever. I don't know, but it was just a lot of it was led from me just like overworking and overcommitting to things that like I just didn't have the time or mental capacity or anything to, like I couldn't take anything else on, but I was just saying yes to everything. I ended up being in a really rough spot of like I was suicidal, and I had like set a date and everything. I don't know how much you want me to go into it or anything, but like it got really bad for a while. And
so what helped you? So that's, you know, people kind of get a feel for that. That's just super dark, right?
Yeah,
and
it was rough.
You're like, and I think sometimes when people are in those spots where we just, you know, wrongly start thinking that, everybody'd be better off if I wasn't here. Mm-hmm. You know, like you kind of have those kind of thoughts.
Yeah. I was dealing with
and I had
that
enough life insurance on me. I thought everybody would really be better off financially if I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like, but at any rate, you know, so what were things that helped you pull out of that?
Getting out of my head, because it was constantly, I was always hearing only what I was saying to myself of like, everybody would be better off without me, or I bet everybody's tired of dealing with me being bummy and sad and upset and emotional all the time. So those were the stuff that I would speak over myself on a daily basis. And then so I started believing those things. And so the first step to me was like talking about it. And then the first person I talked to about it was like, that's not the case at all. And then so like, that was the first time I had like heard otherwise, you know?
Yeah. Somebody started saying, no way, man.
Yeah.
You're an awesome guy, and we're blessed you're here, and you start hearing a different voice, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hearing something else and being willing to like talk about it. I was really bad about bottling everything up and just not letting anything out. Like I didn't want anybody to know that I was having a hard time. I didn't want anybody to know that I was sad or anything. And so like talking about it was a huge thing. I started talking to, I found a therapist, started doing a lot of that stuff. The cognitive behavioral therapy stuff of like where, like whatever direction you point your brain in is where it's going to go. And like, that has been a huge thing for me, of just kind of like, it feels weird getting into that whole kind of rhythm of like, but you really do just have to like talk yourself through those things of like, a lot of my stuff was like anxiety related too. Mm-hmm. Like it was such an anxious mess and having panic attacks all the time, to the point that like I couldn't like go through a work day without freaking out and having to like go hide in my car for a while.
Yeah.
And so like I don't know, just like getting in those practices of like calming myself down and being present, and like meditation has been a huge thing. Mm-hmm. Just there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I've just kind of been practicing a lot of it, but really like getting out of my head and talking to people was the biggest thing that I could have done, and it helped tremendously. Yeah.
And my most recent blog that just came out was called Naked Spirituality.
Yeah.
And it's about that, about how powerful it is when we we get vulnerable and we get honest with the right people.
Yeah.
You know, because that's a huge step, because it's what we keep in secret and what we hide tends to grow in power, and it, you know, darkness thrives in secrecy, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, you know, a year ago when we started doing these podcast interviews, we started with a series on mental health, mm-hmm. and the first bunch of people we interviewed Faith Harper, who has a series of books. She wrote Unf Your Brain and Unf this and you know,
that was one of the first books that I read coming out of all of my stuff, and it was such a game changer for me.
Yeah. And some of you who maybe missed those early podcast interviews, you could go back and pick those up, because I interviewed several therapists. I interviewed the top therapist in the DBT model, which is an iteration of CBT, mm-hmm. which is a cognitive behavior therapy, and then dialectical behavior therapy kind of builds on that and throws in some of the meditation stuff. And I interviewed Pam Hausner on mindful meditation, and just
that one. If you don't mind me jumping in right there, like Pam's episode was crazy, because I sit over here during all those interviews and like you're monitoring everything and
mm-hmm.
recording, and she walked you through like a meditation session, and I joined in like when I was sitting over there behind the computer. And I told her when we had that event and she was on that panel, I stopped her before she left, and I told her, I was like, that day that we did that Zoom call with you and you went through that meditation, like that was the first time in a long time like that I felt calm mm-hmm. and like at peace in my body, because I feel like internally is where I'm always freaking out. Mm-hmm. I'm always like, I'm nervous or anxious about something. And so like that meditation and like stopping and being in the moment and like paying attention to your body and stuff like that is huge. And it's just like, but that was like, that's one of my favorite ones. Like if you go back and watch another one, definitely check that one out.
Well, and
like,
I'm in a group with her. You know, I meet every other Sunday night, and you know, if anybody's interested, shoot me an email or something. But so we could keep going, but what I tell people about what you're doing now and how they can get in touch with you through Harbor Media Productions. And I know a lot of people have done your photography thing where you pay what you can, and just give everybody a little window of what's going on now, especially with Harbor Media Productions, and how they might connect with you.
So all of our our website and all of our social stuff is This Is Harbor. So our website is thisisharbor.com. It's HARBOR. And then we do anything photo, video related. We have these events that we do for all major holidays, and then typically one in the summer and one in the fall called it's Harbor Media Pay What You Can sessions. And there's a Facebook group that you can join. And my wife and I were having a conversation one day, and with having a huge family, it's really stressful trying to plan family photos, because you're like, we have to be there at this specific time, everybody get ready. And then typically how it's worked for us is like, by the time you get to where you're taking photos, like everybody's pissed off at each other, because like so-and-so was late, so-and-so had to get their hair done or whatever. And it's just like, everybody's agitated and worked up and everything. And then so like, it's like, you guys better smile. We paid for these pictures, and it's just, it's stupid. Like, it's really stressful. And we were talking about that. And then even just the financial side of like, it's really pricey to have somebody come take family pictures for you. And so we came up with this idea of like, let's just build a set and let people show up. We'll be open for the day and let people show up whenever they want. And we won't rush them through. We'll take pictures. We'll get good pictures, and then we'll email them to them, and they can pay us whatever they can. And so we've been doing that for a little over a year now, and we just did this Christmas one, and we had over almost 80 families come through.
That's awesome.
Which is that one's been our biggest one yet. But they're a lot of fun. It's really cool getting to do that for families. We do like TV commercials. We do a lot of social media content for businesses. Really anything. Like, I love storytelling, so if you've got an idea that you want to put to a video or something like that, I love that kind of stuff. But yeah, we do we do anything photo, video related, and it's a lot of fun. So
Cool.
I'm super thankful to be able to do that. It's been awesome. So.
Awesome. Well, I am so thankful for you, and thanks for doing this interview today.
Yeah,
it's been fun, and I'd thought about it all along, but then yesterday I was like, maybe Matt would be up for this. I wasn't sure. So thanks so much for doing this, and thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures, and we will see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.